What if everything you knew about World War II barely scratched the surface? Behind the official timelines and polished speeches lie stories too dangerous to be told, missions erased, voices silenced, and places scarred forever. These aren't tales from textbooks. They're the ones hidden in sealed vaults, whispered across decades, and buried deep beneath the lies we were fed. Open them now if you dare, but know this: once you hear them, you can't unhear them. Partisans of Tyrol. The winter of 1944 was the cruelest the Italian Alps had seen in decades. Snow choked the narrow passes of Tyrol, burying ancient trails and silencing even the mountain wolves. It was here, in the jagged creases of the earth, that the Shadow Brigade waged a silent war. Officially, they did not exist. The Allies never acknowledged them. The Axis feared them. And for the villagers of the Highlands, they were both saviors and curses, ghosts with guns who brought ruin in their wake. The Shadow Brigade, or Brigata Ombra, was an amalgamation of fractured loyalties. Its leader, Franz Leitner, had once worn the black uniform of a Waffen-SS mountain division. Disillusioned by Nazi atrocities on the Eastern Front, he had deserted during Operation Barbarossa and crossed the Carpathians alone, making his way south into the Dolomites. There he met Matteo Arcuri, a communist partisan from Turin, and Harlan "Dusty" Wexler, an American airman shot down during a bombing run over Vienna. Together, they forged a resistance cell with one purpose: to cut off the supply arteries that fed the German war machine in northern Italy. They operated in the shadows, sabotaging rail lines, ambushing convoys, and intercepting messages along the Brenner Pass. Their weapons were scavenged from dead men and downed planes, their maps were hand-drawn, and their only code of conduct was silence. The OSS had heard whispers of them. Intercepted German radio chatter referred to Die Schattenjäger, the Shadow Hunters, but little else. Even the Italian resistance, fragmented and suspicious, considered them myth. It was a young Tyrolean shepherd named Elsa Baumgartner who first led them to their greatest prize. Her father had been executed by the Gestapo for hiding a Jewish family in a wine cellar. In revenge, she offered Franz information: a narrow tunnel beneath the Ridnon Valley, once used for silver mining, now repurposed by the Germans to move V-2 rocket parts southward. The convoy passed through once a week under cover of darkness, heavily guarded and buried in the snow. The brigade planned meticulously. They sketched the terrain from memory, mapped the mine shafts, and timed the guard rotations. For 10 nights they crawled through frozen stone and ice, planting charges beneath the tracks. On January 4, 1945, as the black trucks thundered into the valley, the night lit up with a roar. The explosion shattered the pass and sent twisted steel and fire raining into the ravine below. Over 40 German soldiers perished. Among the debris were shattered casings marked with the V-2 insignia, the first proof the Allies had of Nazi rocketry movement through the Alps. The retaliation was swift and brutal. The Gestapo executed villagers in Marite and Meuse. Whole hamlets were burned. The Wehrmacht deployed Gebirgsjäger battalions to sweep the region. Franz ordered the brigade to scatter, but many refused. They fought back, striking from high cliffs and melting into forests. One infamous ambush at the Roskopf Trail left 26 German soldiers dead, their weapons looted and bodies buried under snow. By March, the Shadow Brigade had dwindled to fewer than 30 fighters. Wexler, the American, had been captured and executed in a public square in Brixen, his body left hanging for 2 days. Elsa was caught smuggling medicine and thrown into a cattle car bound for Dachau. Matteo lost an eye to a mine and led the last stand at Joffen Pass with a grenade in each hand, buying time for villagers to flee. The final blow came not from the Germans but from within. A man named Dieter Voss, a former Austrian customs officer turned partisan, had been feeding information to the Nazis for weeks in exchange for safe passage for his family. His betrayal led to the massacre at Brenner Gorge, where half of the remaining Shadow Brigade were killed in a trap. Franz was last seen diving into the icy waters below, wounded and bleeding, vanishing without a trace. After the war, the region lay quiet. The official histories made no mention of Brigata Ombra. No medals were awarded. No graves were marked. The Allies, eager to rebuild and stabilize, suppressed chaotic tales of rogue cells operating outside command. It wasn't until 1983, when an Italian historian named Lucia Ferraro uncovered a stash of German field reports in a Berlin archive, that the truth began to surface. Her findings, coupled with testimony from surviving villagers, formed the basis for this story. In a weathered Alpine church in Ridnon, a wooden plaque now hangs above the altar. It bears no names, only a simple carving of a mountain shadow and the words, "Per quelli che hanno combattuto senza essere visti," for those who fought unseen. To this day, hikers in the Alps sometimes find rusted shell casings beneath the snow, or fragments of an old radio, or a boot print where none should be. And if they listen closely, they say, the wind carries whispers of ghosts of guns, and of a war that raged in the coldest silence. In the dead of winter, the air around Lake Ladoga did not simply chill the skin, it froze breath mid-sentence, silenced artillery in the snow, and turned men into statues of frost. For the citizens of Leningrad, besieged by the German army since September 1941, the lake offered their only hope. Its frozen surface became the famed Road of Life, ferrying food and supplies across under the roar of Luftwaffe bombers. But what few ever knew was that beneath the ice, a secret pulsed like a hidden artery, an engineering marvel born of desperation, sweat, and silence. Project Krasny Led, or Crimson Ice. By late 1942, the Germans had intensified bombardment of the surface convoys. Trucks were picked off in droves, and the number of successful crossings plummeted. Soviet military planners, fearing the total starvation of Leningrad's population, convened in a bunker beneath the Smolny Institute. There, a radical idea was proposed by Colonel Pavel Voroshilov: dig under the lake. It was, by any measure, madness. The idea was to excavate a supply tunnel beneath a body of water nearly 200 square kilometers in size, through frozen soil and permafrost, using limited machinery and an exhausted workforce. Stalin approved it with a single line, asterisk, "The people of Leningrad do not need excuses. They need bread." Asterisk. Work began in November 1942. Over 2,000 miners, many of them women from the Ural coal towns, were secretly brought in under cover of darkness. They operated in shifts of 10 hours, using dynamite, shovels, and hastily converted oil drills. Soviet engineers mapped the route with crude sonar equipment, often relying more on instinct than precision. Ice above them cracked and groaned. The walls wept with subterranean frost. Food rations were pitiful. Deaths from exposure, exhaustion, and collapse were routine. The frozen soil shifted constantly, and without modern reinforcements, many shafts caved in, entombing workers alive. Those who survived learned to recognize the tremble of a coming cave-in, the subtle warning of a hungry earth. They sang songs to drown out the dread, their voices echoing through hollow stone. They called the place Pod Led, the under-ice world. Inside, men and women became creatures of the dark, crawling through frostbitten arteries with crates of ammunition, bread, and penicillin strapped to their backs. Young boys too small to fight in the Red Army worked as runners, darting through tunnels with messages and bandages. One such boy, Sergei Yudin, later recounted how he once met a woman who had been underground for 27 days without emerging. Her name was Tatiana Mirova. She had lost both her children in the siege and volunteered for the project out of grief. "I sleep in the dirt," she told him, "because there, I am closer to my sons." The breakthrough came on January 29, 1943. After over 90 days of digging, the tunnel reached the Leningrad side bank near the Novaya Derevnya district. Supplies began flowing underground, slowly at first, then in greater numbers. Trucks outfitted with low-profile chassis drove into camouflaged entrances and disappeared into the earth, emerging hours later on the other side. The Germans never discovered it. Their aerial reconnaissance reported no unusual activity. Soviet deception units deliberately ran empty convoys across the frozen lake to keep their attention fixed above. Meanwhile, the tunnel helped feed over 400,000 people during the worst stretch of the siege. As the Red Army broke the blockade in January 1944, Project Crimson Ice was quietly sealed. The tunnel, never officially recorded in Soviet archives, was flooded and left to time. Those who worked on it were sworn to secrecy. Some were arrested later during Stalin's purges, accused of overstepping logistical protocols. Others vanished into the war's aftermath. The truth remained buried until 1996, when a construction team laying fiber-optic cable discovered reinforced stone beneath the lakebed. A team of Russian historians and divers investigated and recovered metal beams stamped with 1943 Soviet military codes, broken rails, and frozen crates of bread still intact after 50 years. A rusted plaque was found embedded in one of the walls. It read simply, asterisk. Asterisk blood and ice. We made the way. Today, the site is known only to a few. Official records remain sparse, and many within Russia's Ministry of Defense deny its existence. But the survivors, those few who still remember the tunnel's icy breath, tell a different story. They remember the darkness, the salt of frost in their lungs, and the rhythm of picks striking frozen earth. They remember the tunnel that defied nature itself. Crimson ice was not a marvel of modern engineering. It was a monument to human will. In a world buried under siege, starvation, and winter, it was proof that even beneath the coldest silence, life could find a way to speak. In the hushed corners of war, where guns fall silent and whispers carry the sharpest blades, one name drifted through Nazi-occupied Paris like smoke: Silhouette. She was never seen clearly, never photographed, and rarely described the same way twice. To the Germans, she was a ghost. To the French resistance, she was a lifeline. To the British Special Operations Executive, she was known simply as Agent M47. Her real name was Margot Haynes, and she had once been a stage actress on the West End before vanishing into the shadows of Europe's greatest conflict. Margot's transformation from stage darling to spy began in the rubble of Coventry, 1940. Her theater had been bombed during the Luftwaffe Blitz, killing her younger brother, an RAF cadet, who had come to see her performance. 2 weeks later, she volunteered for the SOE. Fluent in French, skilled in mimicry, and already trained in the art of performance, she passed her assessments with unnerving ease. Her instructors remarked that she could vanish in plain sight. In 1942, she was parachuted into France under the identity of Claire Fournier, a cabaret singer with minor celebrity in pre-war Paris. She resumed her fictitious career at Le Chat Noir, a club popular with Wehrmacht officers and known to be frequented by Gestapo. From her dressing room, she operated a miniature radio set disguised within a makeup case. Her lipstick concealed microfilm. Her high heels were hollowed to hold cyanide capsules. Margot did not kill with a weapon, she killed with information. Through charm, song, and careful manipulation, she learned troop movements, intercepted courier paths, and documented the transit of prisoners through Gare de l'Est. In one operation, she seduced a Luftwaffe major who oversaw regional fuel distribution. Over 2 months, she leaked every timetable of fuel shipments, resulting in a string of successful Allied air raids that crippled German mobility from Paris to Reims. But her most daring mission was Operation Silhouette, the sabotage of a key railway junction in Aubervilliers. It had become a logistical nerve center for transporting V-weapon parts to Calais. The plan: coordinate a resistance assault during a German officer gala held at her club. Margot lured over 30 officers to Le Chat Noir that night with promises of a special performance. Meanwhile, a 3-man sabotage team, guided by coded lyrics from one of her songs, planted explosives beneath the junction. As midnight approached, Margot took the stage. She sang Sous le ciel de Paris, her voice steady even as distant detonations shook the building. The junction was destroyed. Train movements to Calais halted for 6 days. Her audience, drunk and dazed, never suspected her. The Gestapo began to close in shortly after. Intercepted radio chatter mentioned a female phantom, leaking secrets through the cabaret circuit. The club was raided, dancers interrogated. Margot barely escaped, guided through the sewers by a teenage courier named Luke. From that moment, she vanished entirely from public view. She assumed new identities across Paris: nurse, laundress, schoolteacher. Each time she resurfaced, it was to pass intelligence, sabotage a shipment, or relay messages to SOE headquarters in London. Her messages were often encoded within sheet music or children's rhymes. In one instance, she smuggled information inside the stuffing of a teddy bear belonging to a German officer's daughter. Margot's final known act was in August 1944, days before the liberation of Paris. Disguised as a Red Cross volunteer, she infiltrated a German field hospital to rescue a captured resistance leader named Jules Artaud. Witnesses claim she walked in with forged papers, wheeled him out on a stretcher, and disappeared into the smoke of a nearby bombing run. After the liberation, Allied intelligence attempted to locate her. No trace. Her SOE file was marked, presumed dead or operating independently. Luke, the courier who had once saved her, later claimed she boarded a British medical transport bound for Brussels and simply never returned. Decades later, a sealed envelope was delivered anonymously to the British consulate in Paris. Inside were pages of coded reports signed M47, a lock of dark hair, and a hand-scrawled note, *, I was never real. Only the mask was. *. In 2005, MI6 declassified several wartime files that confirmed the existence of Agent M47. Embedded within them was a brief performance contract signed by Margot Haynes for Le Chat Noir in 1942. Handwritten on the back was a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet, "I am but mad north-northwest. When the wind is southerly, I know a hawk from a handsaw." Today, in a corner of the Imperial War Museum, her name appears on a single plaque among the SOE's unknown operatives. No body was ever found. No medal was ever awarded. Yet those who lived because of her actions remember the voice that sang through fire, and the phantom who danced in shadow. Silhouette was not just a spy. She was a performance, one that fooled generals, broke supply lines, and reminded the world that even in a city occupied by fear, one woman's stage could become a battlefield. The Pacific island that spoke back before it became a ghost island, Kaho'olawe, was a whisper in the Pacific, a sliver of red rock and sacred soil, revered by native Hawaiians as a spiritual training ground. It had no freshwater, no roads, and no people by the time the Second World War came. But in the eyes of the U.S. military, that isolation made it perfect. Remote. Uninhabited. Disposable. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the U.S. Navy seized control of Kaho'olawe under martial authority. It was earmarked for training, specifically for bombardment simulations meant to prepare American forces for the upcoming island-hopping campaign across the Pacific. On paper, Kaho'olawe was simply a dot to be bombed. In practice, it became a silent witness to some of the most dangerous experiments of the war. At first, the island was pounded with conventional artillery from ships anchored miles away. Then came the airstrikes. Waves of dive bombers screamed over the cliffs, dropping ordnance day and night. By 1943, entire craters pocked the island's crust, and vegetation began to disappear under the onslaught. Marines ran beach landing drills on its shorelines, while Seabees bulldozed observation posts into the slopes. But the true secret of Kaho'olawe was buried deeper, classified experiments connected to the Manhattan Project. In 1944, under complete secrecy, a subunit of American physicists and military engineers arrived aboard a converted cargo ship under orders from the War Department. Their mission: test shockwave effects, incendiary patterns, and terrain reactions to high-yield explosives modeled after theoretical atomic devices. They were forbidden from using actual nuclear material, but the simulations were designed to measure everything else. Tremor sensors were installed across the island, and high-speed cameras were placed in bunkers constructed of concrete and volcanic rock. Massive explosive charges, equivalent to thousands of pounds of TNT, were detonated in sequence. Locals on nearby Maui reported strange flashes at night and dead fish washing ashore in droves. The Navy denied everything. When a schoolteacher from Lahaina, Lani Kaukai, sent a letter to the Honolulu Advertiser questioning the blasts, she was visited days later by men in uniform. Her letter never saw print. Her family later recalled that she never spoke about it again. One of the most ambitious experiments took place in July 1944, Operation Pahoa. Named after the Hawaiian word for dagger, it involved the simultaneous detonation of 3 massive charges buried in a triangular pattern. The goal was to simulate a multi-point detonation strategy for an island target, possibly a blueprint for the Okinawa invasion. The blast scorched a basin now known only to environmentalists as the Black Pit, a wide, lifeless crater where not even insects return. Among those who witnessed the blast was Lieutenant Edward March, an Army liaison attached to the Manhattan Project who later testified in 1978 before Congress during Kaho'olawe's demilitarization hearings. He described a hellish silence after the final explosion. No birds, no wind, just heat and dust rising from the cracked earth. The island, he said, felt like it had screamed without a sound. The island became haunted in local lore. Fishermen reported sudden radio interference when sailing too close. Ancient petroglyphs, once etched into the rocks, began to crumble from the shock waves. Native Hawaiian elders warned that the island's spirit had been violated, that Kaho'olawe had been turned from a place of learning into a burial ground for war sins. When the war ended, Kaho'olawe was not returned. The Navy continued to use it for bombing exercises well into the Cold War. The secret tests were buried beneath layers of red tape and bureaucracy. It wasn't until the 1970s, when Native Hawaiian activists began occupying the island in a movement known as Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana, that whispers of the wartime experiments resurfaced. In 2001, following decades of protests, partial cleanup efforts, and environmental surveys, a hidden cache was discovered beneath a collapsed observation bunker. Inside were rusted film reels, corroded sensors, and fragments of an engineering log marked Apex 3, classified July 44. Radiation levels were non-lethal but abnormally elevated, consistent with proximity to high-yield experimental detonations. The film reels, restored and digitized by environmental historians, show grainy footage of the island erupting in dust, waves of heat distorting the lens, and the ghostly image of a shockwave peeling across the cliffs like a giant's breath. No faces are shown. No names appear. But the footage tells a truth the official records never admitted. Kaho'olawe was America's rehearsal stage for destruction. Today, Kaho'olawe remains scarred. Though declared safe and returned to the state of Hawaii, large portions remain inaccessible due to unexploded ordnance. No one lives there. Rainfall is scarce, the soil eroded. Yet every year, a group of native Hawaiians visit for cultural restoration and spiritual ceremonies. They chant for healing. They plant seedlings that rarely take root. They walk among the craters and leave offerings of salt and flowers. They say the island still remembers. That the earth breathes differently when you walk across it. That if you press your ear to the stone, you can hear not just the echoes of bombs, but the murmurs of ancestors, warning, forgiving, enduring. Kaho'olawe never asked to be part of the war. It never fired a shot. But in silence, it bore the weight of a world testing the boundaries of annihilation. And in that silence, it spoke back. At precisely 2100 hours each Sunday night between 1942 and 1945, radios across the Nazi-occupied Netherlands crackled to life with a faint chime, followed by a soft, unmistakable Dutch voice. Goedenavond. Dit is Radio Wilhelmina. It was a name whispered in bomb shelters and behind blackout curtains. A name that the Gestapo hunted, feared, and failed to silence. Radio Wilhelmina wasn't just a broadcast, it was a lifeline. Operating from the basement of a London boarding house under the auspices of the British political warfare executive, Radio Wilhelmina served as a covert psychological weapon and a beacon of resistance. Named after Queen Wilhelmina, who had fled to England after the German invasion in 1940, the station's mission was to undermine Nazi propaganda, uplift the Dutch spirit, and, when possible, deliver encoded instructions to underground cells across the Netherlands. Its creator was Willem van Dijk, a former schoolteacher from Rotterdam turned exiled broadcaster. Van Dijk had once run a community radio club in his hometown, but when the Luftwaffe flattened much of the city in May 1940, he escaped with nothing but a notebook of poetry and a heart full of rage. In London, he found like-minded exiles and proposed the radical idea of a poetic resistance, a radio station that would blend news, satire, and folk music with subtle, encrypted messages to partisans. He was assigned a small team: pianist and composer Anneke de Jong, cryptographer Frits Bogaert, and voice actress Clara Ridgenhart. Clara's voice, cultured and calm, would become the station's most iconic feature, a sound so familiar that even Nazi collaborators reportedly refused to listen to her broadcasts for fear of falling under her spell. Each broadcast was meticulously constructed. News items were factual but framed with careful bias. German defeats were exaggerated, Axis victories downplayed or omitted. Popular Dutch songs were played with altered lyrics. A children's lullaby about tulips might carry embedded references to ammunition caches. In one famous instance, a seemingly innocent weather forecast about north winds and frozen roads was later revealed to have signaled a planned railway sabotage near Amersfoort. Every message had layers. Frits Bogaert developed a unique cipher system based on Dutch proverbs. If Clara said, asterisk where the windmill turns, the grain will rise asterisk, partisans would know to begin Operation Malstein, a coordinated act of sabotage targeting flour distribution depots used by the German army. The Germans scrambled to jam the signal. Mobile radio detectors were deployed in Dutch cities, sweeping neighborhoods for illegal listeners. Hundreds were arrested merely for tuning in. Still, the audience grew. People passed transistor radios hidden in loaves of bread or inside the linings of coats. Underground listening parties were held in barns and basements, with children standing watch at the windows. The Nazis mocked the broadcasts publicly but feared their psychological power. A 1943 SS memo described Radio Wilhelmina as a seductive poison, clothed in silk, and placed a bounty of 100,000 Reichsmarks on any information that could lead to the operators' identities. No one ever collected. The broadcasts became bolder as the war dragged on. In early 1944, just before D-Day, Clara's voice read a poem titled The Tide, comparing the sea to a gathering storm of freedom. Though seemingly abstract, it included phrases matching code phrases sent to Dutch resistance cells. The anchor will lift. The moon is full. The east winds sleep. 2 days later, sabotage operations crippled German transport networks throughout the western Netherlands, delaying their response to the Normandy landings. Van Dijk's team lived under constant tension. They were not soldiers, yet each broadcast could cost lives, both theirs and those of listeners in occupied territory. Anneke, whose family remained in Utrecht, composed a haunting piano piece titled Echo over the Dunes to mourn the Dutch lives lost after a botched message led to a failed raid. The station played it just once. Listeners never forgot it. As the Allies pushed toward victory, the tone of the broadcasts shifted from caution to hope. Clara began opening each show not with coded greetings, but with the Dutch national anthem, spoken softly, without music. In April 1945, she delivered a 5-minute monologue titled When the Tulips Return, describing a dream in which bicycles filled the streets again, lovers walked along the canals, and church bells rang unafraid. Many listeners wept, later claiming they felt, if only for a moment, that liberation was real. The final broadcast aired on May 5, 1945, the day German forces in the Netherlands officially surrendered. It began with 30 seconds of silence, then Clara's voice, trembling for the first time, said, asterisk, this is Radio Wilhelmina. We have waited. We have hoped. We are free. Asterisk, then came the full Dutch anthem, played live on Anneke's battered piano, accompanied by the sound of London church bells in the distance. After the war, Radio Wilhelmina was quietly retired. Van Dijk returned to teaching. Clara disappeared from public life, later revealed to have suffered severe trauma from the psychological strain of her role. Anneke died in 1952, her wartime sheet music preserved in the Dutch National Archive. Frits Bogaert joined NATO as a security consultant. Today, only fragments of the broadcasts survive, badly preserved acetate discs and faded transcripts stored in dusty archives. Yet among the Dutch, stories still circulate, of mothers humming strange lullabies, of fathers who wept at coded verses, of resistance fighters who struck back because a voice in the dark told them when. Radio Wilhelmina never fired a bullet. But it struck fear into oppressors, carried hope to the oppressed, and proved that even under the weight of tyranny, a nation could still sing. Its final echo, quiet and untraceable, may still linger in the static between stations. You've just stepped through a door the world tried to keep shut. The silence around these stories wasn't an accident, it was enforced. Names lost, graves unmarked, voices drowned beneath decades of denial. What else still lies beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? The war may have ended, but its secrets haven't. If these 5 were buried this long, how many more remain hidden in the dark?